These guys have got access to other audiences, so I think you should know about them. One of the things I've tried to do with this conference and the sales confidence community is bring revenue and sales leaders, like what's happening around the world, what are the best practices, what is the thought leadership, and these guys have a lot to share. So we've got Alex Theuma from SaaStock. Alex is actually the founder and CEO of the largest community of SaaS founders and VCs in Europe, and he's been running a conference business after being a sales leader in the past, annually in Dublin. I've been able to experience it. It's inspired a lot of what we've achieved at SaaS Growth over the last few years. And I think what Alex is great at doing is getting the founder perspective. And why the founders are so interesting is because us as sales and revenue leaders go and join these companies. So it's great to have you share some of those insights from SaaStock Remote, which you recently ran, Alex. Thomas is dialing in from San Francisco. He's the founder of FE International, which provides advisory services for mid-market SaaS, e-commerce, and content businesses. Now, he's been an advisor for almost 500 acquisitions over the last 10 years or so. So this is an individual that understands why companies exit, what the outcomes are, but they also run their own conference and SaaS magazine. So I recommend you check out SaaS magazine and SaaStock. So guys, thanks for being here today. Excited to have you share your insights. I'll start with you, Alex, and then Thomas, if you can pick up. The first question I've got really is, look, you yourself have interacted in your own event a few weeks ago with tens of founders and VCs. What's your recent observations from your conversations about what is happening in SaaS that should give us some optimism as sales and revenue leaders for growth?
Yeah, thanks, James. Excited to speak at first SaaS Growth event. So yeah, I think observations are, like, if you're in SaaS, right, we're in a good place. We're in overall a good industry to be. So you can be very optimistic about that. SaaStock Remote, which we held a couple of weeks ago, had a couple of thousand founders and investors there from across the world. We learned many things that made me very sort of bullish, about being in the SaaS industry and hopefully continuing to sort of ride the wave there. We learned and we heard that the digital adoption, and acceleration that we've seen in the last couple of months has been equivalent to almost 2 years worth of adoption within a couple of months, like owing to COVID. We're seeing a time where really kind of cloud has come to the fore, where software has pretty much eaten the world. And now, again, because of COVID, we're enabled to, work remotely, work from home. And, I think all these sort of companies that didn't think that their teams could work from home, have realized that actually, they can and can save a lot of money there. And in many cases, companies be productive. We can shop safely, we can learn from home via, events like SaaS Growth and other type of e-learning events. So very bullish around it. I think the future of work, is playing out now. And if you're in SaaS, it's a great place to be there. On the most part, there are going to be winners, right? There always are, right? And winners, clear winners that we've seen, companies like Zoom, companies like Shopify. I think companies like Miro, Notion, doing pretty well out the back of this. If you're working at a startup that perhaps is newer, maybe is at the kind of the earlier stage, your growth, perhaps your revenue growth, may have taken a hit, but there will be a recovery. So I believe that you can be optimistic around that.
That's great to hear, and it's great to hear that. Which a lot of us rely on, whatever our opinion is, of the venture capital investment continuing during this climate. Once there was an assessment, I kind of felt that, there was a lot of board meetings happening, emergency board meetings, things were frozen for a moment, or, there were some immediate pains and cuts. But clearly in this market, there's an understanding that companies need to have enough runway to see themselves through it. And I think as an industry, probably in a bit of a bubble, we've benefited more than of course a lot of others. Thomas, what's your views and observations over in the Valley?
Yeah, so I mean, we work with companies all over the world in the SaaS space. I think firstly, main positive signal is M&A is still happening. People are still buying companies. I think when, like many companies, when the pandemic first hit, we weren't sure. We didn't know if investors would continue to have confidence. And if anything, we're on track for our best year yet. Things are looking good in that space. I think in the world of SaaS themselves and the businesses we've seen, a lot of them have just continued to grow, and maybe their original forecasts were not so optimistic once things hit. And I think Alex already mentioned a couple, but one we've seen in particular is a lot of businesses are now trying to move online, whether they had a retail store or people who have lost their jobs just trying to sell products online. So platforms like Shopify have become really popular. And then off the back of Shopify, there's a whole world and kind of infrastructure of companies built around the platform. So we see a lot of Shopify app businesses where effectively you build an extension for Shopify to help someone's store make more. Those businesses are really popular. We've seen a lot of those businesses go from maybe growing 2-3% a month to 20-30% a month, just because of the influx of kind of new users onto the platform. So I think a lot of people look at the public markets. So if you look at, say, the stock price of Shopify, it's done really well, but often those things can be driven by lots of factors. But what we see, I guess, is the inside information, which is the actual people building around the platform. And almost all of those businesses have had a great, say, 3 to 6 months at this stage. And that's just one example platform. I think Alex mentioned Zoom. We've seen lots of kind of e-learning and collaboration platforms that most of you would never have heard of, but they've still done really well. Some of these companies have gone from, we saw one recently go from about $10,000 MRR, so a relatively small company. They're now about 100,000 in a few months with a team of 2 people. So there's a lot of really interesting growth stories out there in businesses that previously you probably never really known anything about, but they're platforms that have suddenly become essential for businesses.
Yeah.
So I think what this has really done this year is kind of driven the adoption of SaaS probably faster than, I think a lot of companies are making decisions faster, whether that's signing the PO or kind of self-onboarding for a smaller or kind of easier to get on board.
That's very interesting. I think, there's a lot of sales, this is a predominantly sales leadership, revenue leadership audience that are responsible for reps that have got closed deals faster. And I think what we've taken today, we are definitely, at least in the UK, seeing an opening of, the coming out of the lockdown. I think people's moods are lifting, but from a kind of dirty business deal perspective, deals are still getting done a lot in SaaS industries. And therefore, I think maybe it's always difficult, if we're collectively in this excuse together, it's a mindset shift. And we're going to be talking about mindsets in the afternoon and how to coach your team. Look, some industries, particularly from a press perspective, brick and mortar, retail, travel, all industries have been really hard hit. Have you seen, and you've mentioned some SaaS companies, but those industries that are thriving, Alex, what are notable from what you've been hearing?
I mean, there's a few you mentioned there. Obviously, e-commerce is doing really well. The obvious ones, I think video conferencing, collaboration sort of tools. And I mentioned some of those companies again. I mean, we only started using Miro, for instance. We only found out about it when we went remote. We needed to do a quarterly planning day. We needed, a collaboration sort of whiteboarding tool. Found Miro, and we're like, wow, this is great. And and seeing that, then finding out that this is a company that really is a rocket ship, right? Something I think pretty obvious. I want to talk an industry that I want to talk about, online event tech, right? I think beginning of this year, not a space that I was super interested in, although perhaps I should have been in conferences. I wouldn't be able to tell you that many online event tech company names. But look at what we're using now. Company Hopin, for instance, rushed out of beta, earlier this year. Raised a $6 million round in February, a seed round. couple of months later, or I mean, well, this month they've just raised a 40 million Series A. And they're apparently, their growth is something that many VCs just haven't seen in a very, very long time, right? So we're seeing companies, certainly in online event tech, where supply cannot match demand, and they're having wait lists, and it's just like it's phenomenal growth. So that's a super interesting space to be. Will be interesting to see what happens, like when we're using online event tech now because we kind of have to, but we're also seeing the benefits of it as well. But like next year, when all being well, COVID is more under control, and people want to go back to in-person events. Can these online event tech platforms sustain this hyper growth that they're experiencing right now?
Yeah. That's really relevant, and I've definitely been persuaded. I've settled into today so far, so I'm actually enjoying this experience a lot more. We're coming up on the break, Thomas. It'd be great to get a final parting thoughts from yourself.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke a bit about e-commerce, so I won't talk about that again. We've spoken a bit about remote events, but one thing we've seen a lot of is tools that help enable remote work. So not necessarily with your clients, but internally. I think a lot of leaders and managers are trying to figure out how to manage a remote team probably for the first time. And I think a lot of the things required to manage that, it's not just kind of collaboration tools like Zoom, like Microsoft Teams, Slack, or whatever it might be. It's also ways to help incentivize those employees and kind of keep them motivated and engaged. So we've seen quite a big growth that maybe we wouldn't have seen a year ago of platforms that help facilitate that remote work, and things like employee perks. So for example, our team, when we're in the office, we have a company Uber account and a company Seamless web account that lets you order food after, say, 8 p.m. if you've been working late. But when people are at home, that's not really a thing. So we've had to look for other perks. So we've seen, for example, a subscription box business that supplies kind of snacks to your office. They've pivoted to suddenly going to send it to your employees or your team member's house or your client's house. So lots of different businesses like that, which have kind of grown quite significantly because of the need for managers and sales leaders to motivate their team and keep their clients engaged when they can't meet them in person.
Thank you for that. Look, and in summary, and this is why, I mean, we should feel, while we've all had our personal challenges, we should feel bullish, as Alex talked about what the opportunity is for us. Of course, there's the obvious, like cybersecurity, financial services, and Robbie from ClickFunnels made the point earlier, you just got to understand what pain you're solving for your buyer or what pleasure you're bringing them, and remain positive that we can still build. And I think it's great to have you guys driving the audience. I'm grateful for you to be participating. So I'm going to wrap this up for the break, and we're going to go network, and I will catch you guys very soon.